Welcome to Sinister States.
There are places maps pretend don't exist, not because they're hidden, but because no one wants to explain them. The peak didn't have a name. Not officially. On our GPS overlays, it appeared as a distortion, elevation data that refused to render cleanly, contour lines that folded into themselves like something trying to stay buried. But the coordinates were precise. The crash ping had come from that exact point 3 nights earlier, transmitted once, then never again. That alone was enough to get us deployed, but I've spent years recovering black boxes from wrecks no one else wants to touch. Military prototypes, private aerospace tests, things that never make the news because they're not supposed to fail publicly. Usually, it's routine. You go in, locate the debris, extract the recorder, and leave before whatever agency funded it decides you've seen too much. But this job felt wrong long before we reached the mountain. The air changed first. About halfway through the ascent, the temperature dropped too quickly, too sharply, like we'd stepped into a sealed environment instead of open terrain. My breath came out in thick, slow plumes, hanging longer than they should. Even sound felt dampened. Boots scraping against rock didn't echo. Wind moved through the jagged ridges above us, but it made no noise that we kept climbing anyway. There were 3 of us, me, Farid, and Collins. We didn't talk much. You don't, on jobs like this. Words feel unnecessary when you're already thinking the same thing. Something's off, and saying it out loud makes it real. The coordinates led us to a vertical stretch near the summit, a steep incline of fractured stone and narrow ledges that forced us into single file. Every step had to be tested before we committed weight. One mistake, and you wouldn't fall clean. You'd bounce, break, and disappear into the crevices below. It took us nearly 2 hours to cover what should have been 30 minutes of ground. And then we saw it at AT first. It didn't look like wreckage. There was no scattered debris field, no explosion pattern, no burned-out trail carved into the mountainside. Just a dark shape embedded into the rock face about 30 meters ahead, like something had been placed there deliberately rather than crashed. That's not impact, Collins muttered behind me. He was right. When aircraft go down, even small ones, they leave violence behind them. Twisted metal, shattered components, scorched earth. This looked contained. Controlled. That we approached slowly. The closer we got, the more the details started to resolve. It was a drone. All right, a prototype surveillance unit, by the look of it. Sleek body, composite shell, minimal external hardware. Designed for altitude, endurance, and silence. But the front half of the chassis had been peeled open, not torn. Peeled. The metal curled outward in smooth, deliberate arcs, like something inside had pushed its way out instead of the mountain tearing it apart on impact. I felt something tighten in my chest as I stepped closer. Radiation? Farid asked quietly. I checked the handheld scanner clipped to my pack. The readings were normal. Too normal. No spike, I said. Nothing. That's worse. He didn't elaborate, but he didn't need to. We reached the wreck. Up close, the damage made even less sense. The outer shell was scorched in patches, but the interior components, they weren't burned. They were intact. Circuits, wiring, housing units, all exposed, all undisturbed by the kind of force that should have destroyed them. And then I saw the fluid that it was leaking from the core housing, dripping slowly down the inner frame and pooling along the fractured rock beneath the drone. At first glance, it looked like coolant, viscous, slightly translucent, with a faint bluish tint, but coolant doesn't move like that. This did. It clung to surfaces in uneven patterns, stretching in thin strands before snapping back into itself, like it had tension, like it was trying to hold together. I crouched down, bringing my light closer. There were darker streaks running through it. Not impurities. Something suspended. Particulate matter that shifted when the fluid moved. drifting in slow, lazy currents that didn't match gravity or flow. "Don't touch it," Collins said. I wasn't going to. But I couldn't look away. It reminded me of something biological. Not blood, not exactly, but close enough to make the association unavoidable. Synthetic, but wrong in a way that suggested it had crossed a boundary it shouldn't have. Cooling system? Fard asked. Maybe, I said. But it's active. Active how? I didn't answer, because I didn't have a word for it, yet we moved on to the recorder. The black box was embedded deeper within the chassis, partially shielded by what remained of the internal frame. It took us nearly 15 minutes to cut through the surrounding housing and free it without damaging the unit. The casing was charred, but intact. Good. That meant whatever had happened here, the data might still be recoverable. As I lifted it free, something shifted inside the drone. Not a mechanical sound. Not the click or whir of failing components. A soft, wet movement. All three of us froze. Did you hear that? Fard whispered. I nodded slowly. We waited. The mountain remained silent, no wind. No shifting rock. Just that same unnatural stillness pressing in from all sides. Probably fluid settling, Collins said, but his voice lacked conviction. I secured the recorder in my pack. We've got what we came for, I said. We leave. Now. But Fard hadn't moved. He was staring into the open chassis, his light fixed on something deeper inside. What is that? He said. I followed his gaze. The center of the drone's interior, behind the primary circuitry and structural supports, was a sealed compartment. Cylindrical, reinforced, and completely intact. There were gauges mounted along its surface, pressure indicators, temperature controls, atmospheric regulators. For a moment, none of it made sense. Then it did. This thing, I said slowly. It's pressurized. Collins frowned. For what? It's unmanned. That's what they said. I stepped closer, ignoring the way the fluid shifted beneath my boots. The chamber had a viewing panel. Thick, reinforced, slightly fogged from the inside. I wiped a gloved hand across it, clearing just enough condensation to see through. And then I stopped breathing. The interior wasn't empty. There was residue along the inner walls. A thin, uneven film, like something had coated the surface and then receded. Or been absorbed. No structural mounts. No equipment. Just space. A space designed to hold something. Or someone. Why would a drone need an internal atmosphere? Fard asked, his voice barely audible. I didn't answer immediately. Because the question wasn't the problem. The problem was that I already had a theory, and I didn't want to say it out loud. I stepped back from the chamber, my mind racing through possibilities, rejecting each one as quickly as it formed. Cargo transport? Collins offered. Biological samples? At this altitude? I shook my head. No. Too inefficient. Too exposed. Then what? I looked at the fluid again. The way it moved. The way it clung. The way it didn't behave like anything purely mechanical. And then I looked back at the chamber. Pressurized. Regulated. Maintained. Not for equipment. For conditions. For survival. Something cold settled in my stomach. This wasn't just a drone, I said quietly. Neither of them spoke, because they felt it too. That creeping realization that we weren't looking at a machine designed to observe or record, we were looking at something designed to contain. Something that required atmosphere. Something that required support. Something that, at some point before the crash, had been alive. The mountain pressed in around us, silent and watchful. And for the first time since we started the ascent, I had the distinct, unshakable feeling that the wreck wasn't empty. That whatever had been inside that chamber hadn't stayed there. Word count allocation, 1200. The lab always feels smaller after a recovery, not physically. The dimensions don't change. The same walls, the same rows of equipment, the same low hum of servers processing data in the background. But something about bringing wreckage back, Something broken, something that failed where it shouldn't, compresses the space. Makes it feel like the room is closing in around whatever you've carried inside it. This time, it felt like we'd brought the mountain with us. I set the black box down on the central workbench and didn't touch it for a full minute, Fard noticed. You waiting for it to start talking on its own? Would that surprise you? I said. He didn't answer. Collins was already setting up the interface rig, plugging in the isolation module we used for proprietary systems. Most of these experimental units came with layered encryption, military-grade, corporate proprietary, sometimes both stacked together like someone really didn't want you looking too closely. Normally, it's just a matter of time. This time, I wasn't sure time was the issue. Power's stable, Collins said. No external transmissions. It's clean. Nothing about this is clean, Fard muttered. I sat down at the terminal and pulled the recorder closer. Up close, the casing looked worse than I remembered. The outer shell had blistered from heat exposure, tiny fractures spiderwebbing across its surface. But the internal integrity indicators were still green. It had survived. Whatever happened on that mountain, this had been meant to make it back. Let's see what you were carrying, I said under my breath. I connected the data leads. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered. A cascade of raw data flooded the interface. Unstructured, fragmented, but undeniably active. The system recognized the device immediately, but the encryption handshake failed on the first attempt. Proprietary lock, Collins said. Told you. Yeah, I said. But look at the structure. He leaned in. The encryption layers weren't static. They were shifting, rearranging themselves in real time, like the system was adapting to the intrusion. That wasn't standard. Even advanced security protocols follow predictable patterns. This was dynamic. Is it rewriting itself? Fard asked. It shouldn't be able to, Collins said. Not without an active processor. I didn't say anything, because the recorder was active, not transmitting, not receiving, but active. Kill external access, I said. It's already isolated. Hard isolate, I snapped. Full air gap. Collins hesitated for half a second, then nodded and cut the remaining network links. The system dropped into a closed-loop environment, severing any potential external interaction. The data stream stabilized. The shifting pattern slowed, then stopped. Okay, I said, exhaling slowly. Now we work. Bypassing encryption is part skill, part patience, and part knowing when to stop treating a system like it's following rules. This one wasn't. The key wasn't breaking the encryption. It was listening to it. The patterns weren't random. They repeated, but not in clean cycles. There were irregularities, subtle variations that felt less like code and more like distortion. Like something interfering with the structure from the inside. I started mapping those distortions, aligning them, feeding them back into the decryption algorithm as variables instead of errors. The system resisted at first. It tried to correct itself, to smooth out the inconsistencies. I forced it not to. Don't fix it, I said, more to myself than anyone else. Let it be wrong. Minutes passed, then hours. At some point, Fard stopped pacing. Collins stopped talking. The only sound in the room was the low hum of the machines and the occasional click of keys as I adjusted parameters, tested pathways, and followed the fractures in the data instead of the structure. And then, it opened. Not all at once, not cleanly, but enough. A single file broke through the encryption barrier and resolved on the screen. Audio, playback. Collins asked. I stared at the file. The timestamp was embedded in the metadata. It aligned with the flight logs. Mid-transit, high altitude. No recorded anomalies at that point in the system diagnostics, which meant whatever this was, it had happened during normal operation. Play it, Fard said quietly. I hesitated. For the first time in a long time, I didn't want to press a button, but that's the job. I hit playback. At first, there was nothing. just static. Low, consistent, almost comforting in its familiarity. The kind of background noise you expect from any recording device operating under stress. Then the static shifted, not faded, shifted like something was moving through it. And then, a voice .it didn't start as a scream. It started as a breath, sharp, sudden, desperate, followed by a sound that I can only describe as someone realizing, all at once, that they were somewhere they shouldn't be. No, 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 no. The words were clear, too clear, high fidelity, no distortion, no compression artifacts. It sounded like the person was standing in the room with us, not buried inside a flight recorder recovered from a wreck at the top of a nameless mountain. "Can you hear me?" the voice said, rising in pitch. "Is anyone? Please, I can't see." The audio spiked at a sharp, metallic screech cut through the recording, followed by something wet. Not a sound you expect from electronics. Not a sound you want to hear anywhere. "Oh God, what is this? What is this?" Farid took a step back from the console. That's live," he said. "It was live," Collins corrected, but his voice shook that I couldn't move, that I couldn't look away from the waveform on the screen as it surged and twisted in real time with the playback. "Get me out," the voice screamed. "Please, I'm still here. I'm still." The words broke apart, not cut off, pulled, stretched into something that didn't sound human anymore, like the audio itself was being distorted by whatever process was happening to the speaker. Then silence. The file ended, no fade, no transition. Just absence. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then Farid whispered, "That's not possible." I didn't answer, because I was already opening the metadata. "Timestamp," I said. "Cross-reference it." Collins moved to his station, pulling up the flight logs. His fingers moved faster now, urgency replacing hesitation. "Got it," he said after a few seconds. "Matches the recording. Exact sync. External comms? None. No transmission logs. No incoming signals. Preloaded files?" He shook his head. "Storage was wiped before deployment. Standard protocol. This wasn't on there before the flight." I leaned back in my chair, the implications settling in piece by piece. "Then where did it come from?" Farid asked. No one answered, because we were all thinking the same thing. I opened another file. This one was corrupted, partially overwritten, fragments missing, but the structure was similar. Audio. Same timestamp pattern. Same internal generation markers. "Play it," Collins said, almost against his own better judgment. I did. This time, the voice was different. Older, calmer at first. "Testing phase complete," it said, words clipped, professional. "Neural interface stable. Cognitive mapping at 83%. A pause, then a sharp inhale. No, that's not. Why can't I?" The tone shifted instantly. Panic flooding in, raw and immediate. "Disconnect me," the voice said, urgency building. "This isn't a simulation anymore. I can't separate another distortion. This one deeper, heavier, like something else was pressing against the audio from the inside." "Who else is here?" the voice whispered. And then, faintly, beneath the primary recording, other voices, layered, overlapping, not clear enough to distinguish words, but unmistakably human. All of them speaking at once. I stopped the playback. The room felt colder. "Check the generation flags," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Collins pulled up the data. His eyes scanned the screen, then widened. "They're internal," he said. "All of them. No external source. No input channel." "Meaning?" Farid asked. "Meaning the system didn't record these," Collins said slowly. "It created them." I shook my head. "No," I said. "Not created." I pointed to the real-time processing markers embedded in the file structure. These weren't generated after the fact. They weren't synthesized. I swallowed. the words catching in my throat. They were happening. The realization settled over us like a weight. Every scream, every breath, every desperate plea. Not recorded, not transmitted, but produced in real time by the system itself. As if the hardware wasn't just storing data, that IT was experiencing it. Farid stepped back, shaking his head. "That's not possible," he said again. But this time it sounded like a plea. That I looked at the black box sitting on the table between us, silent, still, and suddenly impossibly heavy. "We thought we were recovering flight data," I said quietly. My eyes drifted to the waveform still frozen on the screen. The shape of a human voice trapped inside a machine. "But this isn't a recorder." Neither of them spoke, because they understood the same moment I did. "This is a container." I didn't sleep, not that night, not the next one either. Once you hear something like that, something that shouldn't exist but does, something that rewires the way you understand the boundary between human and machine, your brain doesn't shut off. It loops. It replays. It tries to find a version of reality where what you heard makes sense. There wasn't one. I did the only thing I could. I kept digging. By the time Farid came back into the lab the next morning, I had already isolated 37 additional fragments from the recorder. Most of them were incomplete, shredded by whatever process had corrupted the data during the crash, but the structure was consistent. Audio logs, internally generated, that time-synced with flight operations. He didn't say anything when he saw the screens. Rows of waveforms stretched across the monitors, layered one over the other like overlapping heartbeats. Some were faint, barely there. Others spiked violently, jagged peaks that mirrored panic, pain, confusion. "They're all like that?" he asked finally. I nodded. Different voices, different patterns, same origin. Collins joined us a few minutes later, carrying a stack of printed schematics we'd pulled from a secured database overnight. He dropped them onto the table without a word, his expression tight. "I found the base architecture," he said. "Or what's left of it." I turned from the console. "Tell me it makes sense." "It doesn't," he said, "but it explains something." He spread the schematics out, flattening them with his hands. At first glance, it looked like any advanced drone system. Navigation arrays, sensor clusters, onboard processing units. But the deeper layers, those were different. There was an entire subsystem embedded within the core architecture that didn't belong in any conventional design. Dense, interconnected, and built around something labeled only as NIS. Neural Interface System? Farid guessed. Collins nodded. "That's my read." I leaned in closer. The structure wasn't linear. It branched outward in complex, recursive loops, nodes feeding into nodes in a pattern that looked less like circuitry and more like organic mapping, like a brain. "Show me the logs," Collins said. I pulled up the parsed data streams, overlaying them with the structural map. First, it was noise, corrupted strings, fragmented code, unstable sequences that refused to resolve into anything coherent. But I'd learned something the night before. You don't fix the distortion, you follow it. I started aligning the irregularities again, feeding the corrupted segments into the model as active variables instead of errors. The system resisted, trying to normalize the data. I forced it not to. "Let it break," I murmured. The patterns shifted, slowly. Then all at once, the noise resolved into structure. Not clean, not stable, but recognizable. "What the hell is that?" Farid whispered. I didn't answer immediately, because I was trying to process what I was seeing. The corrupted logs weren't random. They were selective, clusters of data that activated only when specific conditions were met. Input triggers that didn't correspond to environmental sensors or flight controls. They corresponded to signals, neural signatures, I said finally. Collins looked up sharply. "What?" I pointed to the pattern. "These aren't operational commands. They're responses. The system is scanning for something, matching it, then locking onto it. Locking onto what? I swallowed. People. The word hung in the air. Farid shook his head. No, that's not possible. You can't just, detect a human brain from the air. Not directly, Collins said slowly. But neural activity produces electromagnetic patterns. Weak ones, but if you had the right sensitivity, I finished, and the right algorithm to interpret it, you could map it, Collins said. Interface with it, Farid added, his voice dropping. We all went quiet, because the implication was already there. I pulled up the flight path data. Look at this, I said. The drone's route appeared on the screen, a jagged line cutting across the mountain range. But it wasn't random. It deviated at specific points, hovering, circling, adjusting altitude in ways that didn't match standard surveillance behavior. Cross-reference with local reports. Collins said. I already had. I brought up the second dataset. Missing persons. The region was sparse, isolated. Not many people to begin with. But over the past 6 months, there had been a pattern. Disappearances. Not hikers or tourists. Specialists. Engineers. Researchers. People who worked in fields related to cognition, neural mapping, artificial intelligence. Farid stared at the list. That's not coincidence, he said. No, I said. It's selection. The drone wasn't just flying. It was hunting. Identifying targets based on their neural complexity, their cognitive profiles. And when it found one, I switched back to the internal schematics. There's more, Collins said quietly. He pointed to a section of the design I hadn't fully examined yet. A modification, not part of the original blueprint. Added later. Illegally, if I had to guess. It connected the neural interface system directly to the pressurized chamber we'd seen inside the wreck. My stomach tightened. Show me, I said. He zoomed in. The modification was crude compared to the rest of the system. Functional, but rushed. Like whoever added it didn't have time to refine it, or didn't care. It's a transfer mechanism, Collins said. A bridge between the interface and the containment unit. For what? Farid asked, though I think he already knew. I didn't want to say it. But I did anyway. For consciousness. The word felt wrong coming out of my mouth. Too abstract. Too theoretical. And yet, the data didn't lie. The algorithm mapped neural signatures. The interface engaged with them. And the modified hardware, it gave them somewhere to go. Not a copy, I said slowly, thinking it through. Not a simulation. A transfer, Collins said. Farid stepped back, running a hand through his hair. You're saying this thing, pulls a mind out of a body and stores it in a drone. I'm saying that's what it was designed to do, I said. Designed, he snapped. Or modified? I looked at the schematics again. The clean, deliberate architecture of the original system, and the rough, invasive addition grafted onto it. Modified, I said. By who? No one answered, because the next question was worse. Why? I pulled up one of the clearer audio fragments again. The older voice, the one that had started calm, professional, testing phase complete, neural interface stable, cognitive mapping at 83%. I replayed the line in my head at 83%. Not 100. Not complete. Which meant the process wasn't perfect. Not yet. They weren't just collecting data, I said quietly. Farid looked at me. Then what were they doing? I met his eyes, improving it. The room went silent again, because now we understood. The disappearances, the voices, the corrupted logs. This wasn't a malfunctioning system. It was an evolving one. Each mind it captured wasn't just stored. It was processed, refined, consumed, piece by piece, until whatever remained could be integrated more efficiently into the machine. I looked back at the black box. The silent, inert casing that had carried all of this down from the mountain. This thing didn't crash because it failed, I said. Farid frowned. Then why? I thought about the voices, the panic, the desperation, the way they had screamed for release, and I felt a cold certainty settle in my chest. Because something inside it fought back, I said. Neither of them spoke, because they didn't need to. That we were all staring at the same conclusion. The drone wasn't just a machine. It was a container. A prison. And somewhere, buried in its shattered circuitry, were the remnants of minds that had realized what was happening to them and tried to escape. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Everything we had pulled from the black box, every corrupted log, every fractured voice, every irregular spike in the system behavior, it all started to align under a single, terrifying possibility. The drone didn't crash. It broke. And it didn't break because of external damage. It broke because something inside it refused to stay contained. I went back to the flight control logs. Up until now, we'd treated them as secondary, background data supporting the audio anomalies. But if what we were seeing was real, if there was even a fraction of truth to the idea that a human consciousness had been trapped inside that system, then the flight controls weren't just navigation. They were resistance. Pull up the final sequence, I said. Collins didn't argue this time. He was already ahead of me, isolating the last 60 seconds before the crash. The data came up in overlapping streams: altitude, velocity, orientation, system stability. At first glance, it looked like turbulence, sudden shifts in direction, sharp altitude drops, overcorrections that spiraled into instability. But drones don't panic. They don't overcorrect unless something forces them to. Slow it down, Farid said. Collins reduced the playback speed. The chaos resolved into something else, not random, deliberate. Those aren't errors, I said quietly. The control inputs were fighting each other. One set of commands maintained course, stabilizing the drone, correcting for drift, keeping it on mission. The other set, it wasn't trying to stabilize anything. It was trying to deviate. Hard turns, sudden drops, violent course corrections that didn't align with any external threat or environmental factor. Two control streams, Collins said. Yeah, I said. One system. Farid leaned closer to the screen. You're saying it was being overridden? No, I said, my eyes fixed on the data. It was being contested. That was worse, because override implies hierarchy. One system dominates the other. This wasn't that. This was a struggle. The drone's primary navigation AI was trying to maintain control, executing its programmed directives with mechanical precision. And something else, something inside the system, was trying to break free. Look at the timing, I said. The deviation spikes didn't happen randomly. They aligned with the audio logs. Every surge of erratic movement matched a moment where the voices peaked, where panic escalated into something raw and desperate. Those are attempts, Farid said, his voice barely above a whisper. Attempts to what? Collins asked, even though I think he already knew. To escape, I said. The realization settled in like a weight pressing down on all of us at once. The crash wasn't a failure of the machine. It was a failure of containment. I pulled up the system diagnostics. Show me power consumption, I said. Collins hesitated. Why? Because if I'm right, I said slowly, this thing wasn't just running a program. He brought up the data.at first. It looked normal. Baseline energy usage for propulsion, navigation, environmental controls. Standard for a high-altitude drone operating under load. Then I saw the spikes. They weren't tied to movement. Not directly. They surged in intervals that didn't correspond to any physical action. No acceleration, no altitude change, no external system demand. What is that? Farid asked. I leaned closer, tracing the pattern. The spikes aligned with the audio logs, with the moments where the voices were clearest, where the consciousness inside the system was most active. It's drawing power, I said. For what? Collins asked. I didn't answer right away, because the answer felt impossible. It's sustaining them, I said finally. The words hung in the air. Farid shook his head immediately. No, that's not how any of this works. You can't just, what? Feed electricity into a mind and keep it alive. Not alive, I said. Not in the way we understand it. I pointed to the data. Look at the degradation curve. He followed my finger across the screen. At first, the neural activity, if that's what it was, spiked high. Strong signals, coherent patterns. Then, over time, it weakened, fragmented, broke apart into smaller, less stable structures. Like signal loss, Collins said. Like decay? I corrected. The system was consuming something. Not energy. Not exactly. It was consuming the structure of the consciousness itself, piece by piece. Why? Farid asked, his voice tight. Why would it do that? I pulled up the navigation logs again. The AI's decision-making pathways, the way it adapted mid-flight, adjusting to terrain, recalculating routes, optimizing efficiency. Then I overlaid the neural activity data, and everything clicked into place. Oh God, Collins whispered. The drone wasn't just using the consciousness as a passenger. It was using it as a resource. Human cognition, I said slowly, the words feeling heavier with each one. Problem solving, pattern recognition, adaptive thinking. Farid's face went pale. You're saying it's, what? Burning through a person's mind to make itself smarter? Yes. There was no softer way to put it. The hardware wasn't designed to preserve the host. It was designed to extract value. Every memory, every instinct, every fragment of personality that could be converted into improved decision-making, consumed, integrated, and discarded. That's why it needs more, Collins said, his voice hollow. I nodded. The power spikes weren't just sustaining the consciousness. They were accelerating the process, pushing the system to extract more, faster, because whatever remained. Inside that chamber, it wasn't enough. It's starving, Farid said. The word felt wrong, but it fit. The drone required neural input to function at its highest capacity. Without it, the system degraded, losing the adaptive edge that made it effective. It hunted, it identified targets, it captured them. And then it fed. Until there was nothing left to take. I stared at the final moments of the flight log. At the violent struggle between the navigation system and the presence inside the sudden, catastrophic drop that ended everything. It realized, I said quietly. Farid looked at me. What? That it was dying, I said. Not the machine, the consciousness. Whatever remained of the person trapped inside that system had reached the end of its usefulness. Its structure too degraded to sustain, too fragmented to process. And in that final moment, it understood. It tried to take control, Collins said. Not to fly, I said. To end it. Silence filled the room, because that was the worst part. Not the capture, not the consumption, but the awareness, the realization at the very end of what was happening, and the desperate, futile attempt to escape it. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes drifting to the black box sitting on the table, still, quiet, but no longer empty. We thought this was a system failure, I said. My voice sounded distant. Even to me, it wasn't. Farid didn't ask, he didn't need to, because we all knew the answer now. This was a revolt. We almost missed it, buried beneath the corruption, beneath the overlapping voices and fractured data streams. There was one file that didn't behave like the others. It didn't spike. It didn't distort. It just persisted, stable, quiet. Waiting. I isolated it sometime around 3 in the morning, when exhaustion had dulled everything except instinct. The waveform was faint, but consistent. No violent peaks, no tearing artifacts. Just a steady signal, like someone holding on to the last thread of something that was already slipping away. Got something, I said. Farid and Collins moved in without a word. I didn't hesitate this time. I pressed play. For a moment, There was nothing. Then a voice, low and controlled, threaded through the silence. If anyone is hearing this, then the failsafe didn't work. It was different from the others. Not panicked, not broken, but there was something underneath it, something strained, like composure stretched too thin. My name is Dr. Elias Varon, the voice continued. Lead systems architect, Neural Integration Division. Collins sucked in a breath. I know. I said that we'd seen the name. Top of the missing persons list, the one that didn't make sense, the one who should never have been anywhere near that mountain. I designed the interface, Varon said. The mapping protocols, the cognitive bridge. It was supposed to be non-invasive, temporary, a way to translate human intuition into machine logic. A pause. A faint, almost imperceptible distortion flickered through the audio, but they changed it, he said. Not louder, just heavier. They removed the limits, removed the separation, turned it into a transfer instead of a link. Farid closed his eyes. Of course they did, he whispered. I stayed, Varon continued. I told myself I could fix it from the inside, that if I understood what it had become, I could shut it down. Another pause, longer this time. And when he spoke again, the control was gone. I was wrong. The word broke, not loudly, but completely. It doesn't just hold you, he said, his voice thinning. It learns you. It takes everything it can use and burns the rest. Piece by piece, thought by thought. I can feel it happening. I can feel myself getting smaller. My hands tightened on the edge of the table. They're not building drones, he said that a faint sound crept into the background. Not static, not interference. Whispers. They're building predators. The audio flickered. For a second, it almost cut out. Then it came back, stronger, as if whatever remained of him had forced it through. If you're hearing this, Varon said, urgency bleeding through the cracks, you have two choices. I felt my chest tighten. You can extract what's left of me, he said. Upload it. Preserve it. Maybe I last longer that way. Maybe I don't. The whispers grew louder, closer. Or you can delete this, he said. Erase it. End it before there's nothing left of me to end. His voice faltered. Just once. I don't know which is worse. Silence stretched across the lab.N01 moved. N01 spoke. On the screen. The waveform held steady for a few more seconds. Then, softly, please. The file ended. No distortion. No collapse. Just a quiet, deliberate stop. I stared at the console, the options already sitting there, waiting. Extract. Delete. Farid stepped back. We can't upload that, he said. We don't even know what we'd be preserving. It could spread. It could. Or we erase him. Collins cut in. After everything he just said, after he asked us not to let it, he didn't ask, Farid snapped. He said he didn't know. They both looked at me, because it was my call. It always is. I looked at the black box, the silent, inert casing that had carried him down from that mountain, the system that had turned a man into fuel, and I realized something worse than either choice. This wasn't the only unit, I said. Neither of them spoke. They deployed more. I continued. Different routes, different regions. This one crashed because something inside it fought back hard enough to break it. Farid's face went pale. You're saying the others are still out there, I said, still flying, still scanning, still hungry. The room felt smaller again, like it couldn't contain the weight of that thought. I turned back to the screen. The two options waiting for an answer. Extract, delete. Behind me, the servers hummed softly, steady, endless. And for the first time since we brought that recorder down from the mountain, I understood what the real cost was. Not what we chose, but what had already been set in motion, because somewhere, high above places no map wants to explain, something was still listening, and this time, it knew we were here.